I said, this is Florida. This is what it's supposed to look like. In my mind, this is what I imagined. And from that point on, even though I couldn't afford to do it, I said, I'm going to live on this island. When I was in school, I always knew there was something better than New York City. You'd open up these books, and here was this school with grassy lawns and fields and trees, you know. And I look out my window, and it's a dirty window. I look outside, and it's all gray and dreary looking, you know. And I'm looking at this colorful picture of what life is supposed to be like. I wanted to jump in the book. I'll never forget that when I was a kid. I always wanted to be in the book, you know. I wound up being in the book when I came to the islands here. I was in the Coast Guard. I don't get seasick if I'm in open air. I get seasick once I go below decks. Oh, I got seasick at the dock. In fact, the captain of my ship said, this guy needs land duty. I met this girl at Craig Key, which is just the size of Cabbage Key. A few cottages on one side of the road and the other, and a little restaurant. And my future wife was in that restaurant. Come up to visit her parents on a ferry. We get onto the island. We drive down to the road where her father has this fish camp on Tarpon Bay. It's like something out of a Steinbeck novel. We took a ride down to the beach. Well, let me tell you something. That was a shock of my life. We went down that beach and looked to the right and looked to the left and didn't see a soul. In my eye, when I saw that, it was like for the first time. After I was discharged from the Coast Guard, I got all kinds of different jobs. I mean, you talk about jack of all trades, master of none, that was me. And all I could think about all the time I'm working is how do I get to that island? I noticed Nave's Plumbing. I walked in, I asked them for a job, and they said they didn't need anyone. She says, wait a minute, maybe Dale Ballinger on Captiva, maybe he could use a helper. Let me give him a call. They did it by radio because there were no phones on the island. There was a pay phone on Sanibel at the ferry landing. That was it. And that's the way we lived. But the thing is, we put up with that because of Sanibel and Captiva. When you lived here, you wanted to live here back then. Once in a blue moon, I'd get a family member here. They'd go back and tell everybody I was nuts. He lost his mind. I thought Sanibel was it, you know, because when I drove up to Captiva, when I worked with the plumbers and everything, it didn't appeal to me, you know. Sanibel, we used to go hunting on Sanibel. I mean, it was big, you know. You had forests, like, you know what I mean, jungles. We ate off the land back then. It's hard to visualize this, but we used to go out, we'd get gopher turtle, we'd eat loggerhead turtle, all kinds of birds to shoot. But remember, this was to eat. We went out specifically to get dinner. Dewey, my father-in-law, he had stone crab traps out. We had blue crab traps out. We had a big oyster bar right in front of his place. And we didn't need chickens because we had chickens. Dewey had pigs, but we were eating that to survive, right? There wasn't, you know, we used to laugh because there wasn't a bird that was safe that flew over Dewey's place at dinner time, you know? I mean, if it flew, swam, or crawled, we ate it. When I heard that they were actually going to start building the causeway, I went over and asked for a job. I got the job as a laborer, and I worked on the seawalls around the embankments, you know, before you go over the causeway. For a time, I worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service with Charles LaBeouf at the lighthouse. The way I got started in fishing was I would go down to Dewey's at this fish camp, and once in a while, on a weekend, we'd get some guys come up from Miami. They knew how to fish, but they didn't know the water. So they asked me if I would take them out where they might catch fish, because most of these guys were catching trout, and trout were the easiest damn fish to get. When we got back, they would give me a tip. Now remember, he only had 12-foot boats, but this was Tarpon Bay. I could start fishing 2 minutes after I left the dock. It was Esperanza, Jake Stokes, and me were the only three on Sanibel. And then it was Charlie Rossi and Belton Johnson on Captiva. Esperanza, she trolled. She just trolled the mangrove. Redfish, snook. Jake Stokes had a cabin boat. He went offshore. So there were only two of us fishing in the bay. And eventually Jerry Way started, you know, about a year after I did. And then Belton Johnson, he had a cabin boat and he would go out in the Gulf. So Charlie Rossi was the only other fishing guide on Captiva. Well, I'd gotten to know Timmy from Timmy's Nook. So I got to talking to him one day. You know, sure, you can pick up people here, you know. So I worked out at Timmy's Nook. I was at the Castaways too. Dean Mitchell had the Castaways restaurant, which is the Mad Hatter now. There was a waterway that went under the bridge, and there was land on this side with high Australian pines where you had to look in between the pine trees to see the Gulf. Blind Pass meandered all the way down to what is now Bowman's Beach. That's where it led out into the Gulf. Now, I used to take people all the way down to the tip of that peninsula for shelling. And it was the most fantastic shelling you could imagine back then. The ferry landing was incredible at night around a full moon. Just as the tide was turning, it would be full of snook and reds, schools of them. We had cane poles, heavy cane poles with piano wire, right, with hook. You'd squeeze the bob, you know, because what you were doing was, I don't know if you ever saw the old pictures of tuna fishermen. They'd come in and they'd put it over their shoulder and then flip it back out. Well, that's what it was like. That's exactly what it was like. Sometimes you'd get 3 redfish on one piece of pinfish. The minute it hit the water, they grab it. We had so many redfish in that boat one night that I thought we were going to sink. We had about that much gunnel. If there'd have been any wave action, we wouldn't have made it home. I worked at Andy's. Andy and I, we got along great because I was right next door to him. He was a great guy. Andy was really good, but he had his way about him too. Now, you're not going to believe this, but this is the way it was. Right about here, there was water. He had a big circular pond-like, and it led out, he had his rental boats in here. See, the ice house was right here. The building was right here. The gas pump was right on that side, and the dock configuration, except for this dog leg, it's exactly the same. My boat was tied up like these boats are, this way, with a piling. The building was straight ahead, and you walked into the main entrance on this side. His bait was right, he had it on pulleys, and he sold his shrimp right over here before you went into the restaurant. This was his main entrance right here. This was Andy's cottage. If you can visualize this, when you walked in the house, there was a bedroom here, and then another bedroom, big living area. Kitchen was to our left. Yeah, these are fish ID cards with the tape measure on them. The other one is the shelling ID card. Shows you the different shells you can find on Sanibel and Captiva. I'm an entrepreneur now. All blending out, I don't know what day it is. To give you an idea of the complete change of life, you know, it's a funny thing. When I was guiding, whenever I got out on the water, I always thanked whoever it was that gave me this opportunity, you know, for the life. Because it was like, it's like the name of my book, Every Day is Saturday, right? People wait for weekends to be able to do what I do every day for years, right? I mean, I'm doing something that people dream about.